Здравствуйте, welcome back to Russian Through Poems and Paintings. Today's day 121, and before we move to our major topic in this chapter, which are deverbals, right, by which we mean adjectives, adverbs, and nouns which are derived from verbs, we're going to spend a couple of days talking about first subordinate clauses, of which we've spoken already, so a lot of this will be just kind of an overview and a lot of review of major types of subordinate clause. And then tomorrow we'll talk about advanced prepositions. So prepositions are easy grammatically. We just have to know which case they take. But we'll now learn some somewhat more advanced prepositions that we'll be seeing a lot in the literature we'll read fairly soon. Okay, so by a subordinate clause, we simply mean, right, a secondary clause in a sentence, right, with a complex sentence with more than one clause, a main clause, and then some kind of secondary or subordinate clause. So let's start off with a really easy topic, questions that begin with question words. Sorry, clauses that begin with question words. Right, like who, what kind of, right? Кто, что, какая, где, когда, right? Words like that in Russian that can begin a question. And we know, we've known for quite a while now that we can take a direct question like где ты живешь and make that a reported question, right? For example, я хочу знать, где ты живешь. I want to know where you live. And as with pretty much all subordinate clauses in Russian, we need to set that off with a comma, right? So я хочу знать, comma, где ты живешь. But with clauses that begin with a question word like that, there's no change to anything really, right? We're just taking what was originally a direct question and now using it as a reported question, as a secondary clause that begins with a question word. For example, где он работает? Я не знаю, где он работает. Я не знаю, работает ли он вообще. Okay, now remember we just reviewed fairly recently that the one maybe exception here is a li clause, but we just reviewed that, right? So a yes-no question, a whether question, I don't know whether or not he works. That would be somewhat special, right? We'd get the comma, then whatever the main word in the question is, followed by li, marking that yes-no question. So watch out for that. That's the one exception. Otherwise, these secondary clauses are going to start with the question word. Okay, so let's fill in some blanks. These are really simple, right? There's really no grammar here to speak of. He asked when we'd like to meet. Он нас спросил, когда мы хотели бы встретиться. Right? Когда, right? So that question word never changes. Yeah, I asked them where they were going. Okay, in Russian we need where to they were going, right? Куда. Я их спросил, куда они шли. Number 3, the waiter asks if we were ready to order. Okay, there's the slightly weird one with li, right? We've got to watch word order. Официант спросил, готовы ли мы сделать заказ. Number 4, I don't know what kind of book he's reading. Okay, remember that question word, we have two of these, какой and che. Those are adjectival, right? Meaning they change their forms, they modify a noun, and they've got to agree with whatever noun they're modifying. Okay, so let's think about this one. Я не знаю, and we see we're talking about a книга, right, which is feminine singular, so we're going to use some form of какая книга. But here we see that книгу is in the accusative, right? What kind of book he is reading, right? He is reading what kind of book, accusative. So the answer is going to be я не знаю, какую книгу он читает. Okay, so again, какой is a question word, but it declines just like in any hard adjective. Number 5, did she tell you where her flight is arriving from? Okay, from where in Russian, that's откуда. Она тебе сказала, откуда ее рейс прилетает? Number 6, do you know whose things these are? Okay, there's our second question word, che, which is a special modifier, right? It's adjectival, it modifies a noun. Here we've got a plural, right? Вещи, whose things are these? Чьи это вещи? Ты не знаешь, чьи это вещи? Ты не знаешь, чьи это вещи? 7, sometimes I don't know why I'm studying Russian. Иногда я не знаю, почему я изучаю русский язык. Okay, so those examples are very simple because, again, with the exception of those two adjectives, we're just plugging in the question word and we don't really need to think about a whole lot of grammar there. Let's review another quick thing that, by the way, people confuse quite often, right? Потому что, they often say something like почему что or something, where they get this very common conjunction confused, right? Потому что means because, right? So typically we would put the period and then потому что, right? That's kind of beginning our subordinate clause and then the rest of the clause. Я плачу, потому что мне грустно. Okay, so let's see. For example, почему ты до сих пор изучаешь русский язык? Well, let's think of a simple answer. Я изучаю русский язык, потому что я хочу читать русскую литературу в оригинале, for example, right? Потому что. Почему ты поехал бы в Россию? Why would you go to Russia or why wouldn't you, right? Again, speaking hypothetically. Я бы поехал в Россию, потому что я уже был там и мне там нравится. Right? I've already been there and I like it there, right? Okay, so again, you could fill in any answer to that. Just start off with потому что. Okay, our final two question words. Again, this is review. We've known these question words for a long time. But recall that что and кто are interrogative pronouns, right? They stand in for a noun. And for that reason, they have a full set of declined forms, right? Think of them as like little nouns, right? Again, or pronouns. They stand in for a noun, and so they're going to be marked for case. So when we fill those in to begin a secondary clause, a subordinate clause, we've got to choose the case correctly, right? Depending on how this little pronoun, what role it's playing within its clause. So, for example, я не знаю, кому она звонила. I don't know to whom she was calling. Okay, remember that звонить, that to call, or literally to ring, that takes the dative in Russian. So we need the dative here with кому, right? To whom, literally, she was calling. Я не знаю, о чем он говорил. Okay, there we're using it after a preposition. So, of course, we need the что or кто in the proper case form, right? Whatever case that preposition takes. In this case, prepositional. Я не знаю, о чем он говорил. I don't know about what he was talking. Okay, so let's fill in some blanks here. And again, we've got to watch the context. Number one, we want to say, Mom asked what I'm doing right now. Mom спросила, что я сейчас делаю. Okay, there, что is actually accusative, right? I do what? Я делаю что я сейчас делаю. But of course, there in the accusative, there's no change. Number two, about what is this book? About Russian history, okay? Or that's going to call for prepositional. О чем эта книга? О русской истории? Number three, I don't know with what they occupy themselves, okay? Remember, заниматься takes the instrumental, right? And literally we're saying заниматься means to occupy oneself with something, right? So we just need что in the instrumental. Я не знаю, чем они занимаются. 4. From what do they make kvass, right? Or we might say, what is kvass made of? Is, okay, that takes the genitive, as we know. Из чего делают квас? Из воды и хлеба. Okay, let's take кто. Number 5. To whom are you going for a visit today? Kind of translating word for word, right? Who are you visiting? And of course, here we have кто used after к, which takes the dative, so we get к кому. К кому ты идешь сегодня в гости? 6. I'd like to know about whom they are talking. Okay, about whom. Or, again, prepositional. Хотелось бы знать, о ком они говорят. Number 7. Whom do you know here? Right, whom, right, accusative. Right, again, you can flip the word order if you need to. You know whom, right? Whom do you know? That's accusative. Кого вы здесь знаете? Есть здесь знакомые? Okay, number 8. Они спрашивают, let's see, they're asking with whom we are going to the dacha, right? Who are you going to the dacha with, right? With whom, we know с takes the instrumental. In Russian, они спрашивают, с кем мы едем на дачу. Okay, one more bit of review. I think this goes back to the end of chapter 2, back in book 1, right? Who and which clauses with который. Okay, this is, let's think for a moment. Который, first of all, meaning who or which, is an adjective. We can see that just by looking at it. So we know already we're going to have to change the ending depending on how it's used in the sentence. Now, these clauses are a little bit tricky because we have to, first of all, look to the main clause to figure out what we're talking about. For example, a student, and is the student male, female, right? We've got to worry about gender, right? Is it singular or plural, right? All of that we get by looking to the antecedent, right? That is the noun in the main clause to which this who or which, который, refers. But we have to look at one other thing, right? We have to pick the case, right? So we know the gender and the number from looking at the noun it's referring to, but the case of который depends on what который is doing within its own clause, right? So you might imagine sort of bracketing the little subordinate clause and analyzing it to see which case we need to put который into. So for example, я знаю студентку, которая пишет пьесу. Okay, so look at the arrows. They're just showing us that we're often looking sort of in two directions or at two different things in any case, right? We're looking back at студентка, or in this case, студентку, right? And we're seeing, okay, this который is modifying a female singular something, right? So that would be, we could think of которая as the form we're going to be working with. Now, if we look within the clause, we see who is writing a play. Okay, so the который, or more specifically, the которая, is acting as the subject of the clause, right? Who is writing a play? So, of course, it's going to be nominative. Okay, let's take another example. Это тот самый человек, которого мы видели вчера. Okay, the который is pointing back to человек, so it's going to be masculine singular. But if we analyze within the clause, we see we saw whom yesterday, right? We saw, so the person whom we saw, direct object, accusative. Since it's animate, it's going to look like a genitive form, right? So которого. Это тот самый человек, которого мы видели вчера. Okay, книга, которую мы читаем, русская. Okay, the book which we are reading is Russian. So again, книга, feminine singular. We are reading what, right? Which we are reading or that we are reading. That которая is going into the accusative, right? Которую. Finally, студент, от которого я получил письмо, учится в Москве. Okay, we're talking about студент. That's going to be который. And here, it's rather straightforward. We're using который after a preposition, от, which takes the genitive. So that tells us what case we need, right? Студент, от которого я получил письмо, учится в Москве. Okay, let's try a few of these. So this can be a bit trickier. This is the same wine which we were drinking yesterday. Okay, sounds like вино, that's going to be которое, right, neuter. And we're using it in the accusative, right, which we drank. Это такое же самое вино, которое, right, которое мы пили вчера. 2, the city in which we lived was very pretty. Okay, in which, that's prepositional. We're talking about a город, which is masculine singular. So, город, в котором мы жили, был очень красивый. 3, это та галерея. Okay, so this is that gallery about which I was telling you, right? Это та галерея, о которой, right? So галерея, feminine singular, we're using it here in the prepositional after о которой я тебе говорила. 4, сосед, so the neighbor, okay, blank, I sold the car. Okay, we have a subject, a verb, a direct object already. It looks like we need an indirect object, right? So here's a case where we really have to analyze a little bit. So the neighbor to whom I sold the car, right? Которому, right? Сосед, которому я продал машину, очень доволен ей. He's very satisfied with it. 5, people with whom we interact or socialize are interesting. The people with whom we interact are interesting. Okay, that's люди, that's plural, right? And с is going to be instrumental, plural, right? Люди, с которыми мы общаемся, интересные. 6, те статьи, about which I'm speaking are very boring. Okay, so we're talking about plural articles, right? So we're going to get plural, prepositional after the о. Те статьи, о которых я говорил, очень скучные. 7, the cake which we baked looks terrible, right? Okay, so again, который is going to refer to cake, and we're using it here as a direct object, so no change, inanimate, right? Торт, который мы испекли, выглядит ужасно. 8, ты помнишь тех туристов, blank, мы помогли? Okay, remember, the helping verb takes objects in the dative, right? So here we need a dative plural to point back to turisty, right? We're talking about multiple tourists. So, ты помнишь тех туристов, которым мы помогли? Do you remember the tourists whom we helped? Okay, let's move on with another topic that's actually new for us, although we have seen some of these forms already. And the topic basically is sort of more sophisticated types of subordinate clauses that involve demonstratives that are the equivalent of question words, or they correspond to a certain question word. So if we look over this table, you can see a certain correspondence in most of these forms that you may not have thought about, right? Look at the question words. Что, кто, как, какой, сколько, когда, etc. Где, куда. And we see in almost all of these, we see a ka, right? A K present. And indeed, even where we don't, like in где and что, there was originally a ka there that is mutated, right? So basically, if we reach back to the early days the language, right, question words were formed with a ka, right, while demonstratives were formed with a te, right? So if we look over and compare, we see these are basically the same words, but the only difference being basically a ka versus a te, right? So что, то, кто, тот, как, так, какой, такой. And we're calling these demonstratives because they're kind of pointing out something, right? As if in response to a question, right? So what? Well, that. Who? That guy, right? How? In this way, right? Tak. Какой? Of what kind? Well, of this kind, right? And we're pointing and showing, right? So that gives us a very basic sense of how these demonstratives are used, right? They're showing something, and we can think of them very usefully as, corresponding to a given question word. So let's look at just a few examples with these all by themselves, right? Just using demonstratives. Вы так хорошо говорите по-русски, right? You speak Russian so well, right? And again, we can imagine that in response to a как question, right? How well do they speak Russian? Well, so well, right? So well, as if showing, pointing and showing, or sort of exclaiming, right? You do this so well. Ваш сын такой хороший студент, right? He's such a good student. У них столько денег, right? They have so much money. Now we could also follow up a phrase like this with a result clause with что, right? Вы так хорошо говорите по-русски, что вас можно принять за носителя языка, right? You speak Russian so well that one could take you for a native speaker, right? Носитель языка. Okay, so let's try a few of these. That French wine costs so much. Now, but for this, we have several examples of this. You could say столько, or more likely, you could say так много, right? So much. They both mean exactly the same thing, but так много would be probably more common in speech. Это французское вино так много стоит, right? Or столько стоит. Number two, it costs so much that I can't drink it. Okay, now we have a result clause thrown in. Оно так много стоит, or оно столько стоит, что я не могу его пить. Number three, back then, at that time, we didn't have money. Okay, so we're sort of answering когда, right? At when? Well, then, right? At that time. Тогда у нас не было денег. Number four, look at that picture. He was so young. Then, смотри на эту фотку. Он был таким молодым тогда. Right, таким молодым, right? So we're using такой, and here it's matching up with молодым, instrumental. Number five, I'll have so much work tomorrow. У меня будет так много работы завтра, right? Так много or столько работы завтра. I don't want to buy such a car, right? Well, okay, we're talking about quality, right? The question word would be какой, right? What kind of car? And now we're pointing out and saying, well, a car like that one. I don't want to buy a car like that. Я не хочу купить такую машину. Number seven, that's so rude. You shouldn't talk to him like that. Okay, so both of these are corresponding to the question word как, right? How? How rude is it? How should we not talk to him, right? Well, it's this rude or so rude, and we shouldn't talk to him like that, right? Это так невежливо. Не надо с ним так говорить. 8, I have so many books that there's nowhere to sit. У меня так много книг, что сесть некуда. Right? There's nowhere to sit. Okay, so let's now use these as conjunctions, as sort of compound conjunctions. And we see here basically that in formal Russian, if we're being very formal, we would use first the demonstrative, then a comma, then the question word, right? So again, the pairs, the corresponding question word and demonstrative would go together. But in spoken Russian, typically you would simply get a comma and the question word all by itself, right? So let's look over a few of these. То, что, тот, кто, right? Так, как, такой, какой. Okay, we'll see examples in a moment, but often you would hear these simplified to just the question word что, кто, как, какой, right? These conjunctions. Okay, so let's look these over. And again, in theory, you could have either, and there really is no difference in meaning. But again, obviously the simplified form is shorter, and therefore a lot more likely to be heard in speech. It's just simpler, right? Купи то, что надо, right? Buy that which is needed, right? That which is needed. If we're translating rather literally, or more simply, купи что надо. Okay, that's kind of sounds like more spoken Russian, more colloquial, more informal. Иди туда, куда хочешь, right? Go to there, to where you want, literally. Or simply, иди куда хочешь, go where you want to, go wherever you want. Работаю так, как могу. I'm working in such a way as I can. I'm working as I can. Or simply, я работаю как могу, right? I'm doing the best I can. Возьми столько, сколько надо, right? Take as much as you need, or take so much as is needed. Or as much, yeah, it's kind of hard to translate literally, doesn't often sound very good. Okay, but anyway, the simplified version would be возьми сколько надо. Take as much as you need, as much as is necessary. Okay, now one addendum is the expression то, что. Okay, so we just saw that can often translate as that which, right, sort of informally. Or formally, sorry. Это то, что я хотел. This is that which I wanted, right? Or more simply, this is what I wanted. Это то, о чем мы говорили. This is that about which we were talking, right? This is what we were talking about. And now тот кто, right? Similarly with кто, тот кто means one who or he who, right? Тот не ошибается, кто ничего не делает. That's a little пословица, right? A little saying. He does not, or one does not make a mistake who doesn't do anything, right? Just translating literally. He does not make a mistake who doesn't do anything, right? Or more loosely, one who, right? One who does nothing is never wrong, right? Okay, so that's something to watch out for. Again, то, что, that which, and тот, кто, one who. Now, the final thing to add today is that то, что sometimes translates as that, the fact that, when it's referring basically to a verb, right? It goes with a verb and you're saying, well, the fact that this happened or whatever surprises me, right? So essentially, if you see a to, что in a text, which is relatively common, right? And you're trying to translate or understand it, and that which doesn't work, then try the fact that, and you'll often see that will work perfectly. Okay, look at a couple of examples here to compare. То, что он сделал, меня удивило. Okay, let's try that which, right? То, что. That which he did surprised me. Okay, that makes perfect sense, right? And then we could, of course, translate more loosely, right? What he did surprised me. That which he did surprised me. Okay, now look at this other example. То, что он это сделал, меня удивило. Okay, so let's just try to translate with that which. That which he this did surprised me. Okay, that doesn't sound quite right? So let's try our fallback option, the fact that he did that surprised me. Okay, and that makes perfect sense, right? То, что он это сделал, меня удивило. All right, let's fill in a few blanks. Do what you want. Okay, so there are two blanks here for most of these, and that means that we have space to fill in the combined expression, right, with both the demonstrative and its question word. But then again, we could simply use the question word to give a simpler version of that. Do what you want. Делай то, что хочешь, right? Do that which you want. Or simply делай что хочешь. Number two, do it the way they want. Делай это так, как они хотят. So shorter version would be делай это как они хотят. 3, there's no hot water where he lives. Okay, so there where he lives, that would be kind of the fuller variant. Там, где он живет, нет горячей воды. Okay, number 4, they don't speak Russian as well as we do. Они не так хорошо говорят по-русски, как мы. Okay, so there's a somewhat different expression, right, with the tak and kak are kind of separated. They don't speak as well as we do. Okay, number 5, back when we lived here, it was less expensive. Okay, тогда, когда мы здесь жили, было менее дорого. Right, тогда, когда, or simply, когда мы здесь жили, when we lived here. Number 6, what they say frightens me. Okay, sounds like a that which, right? То, что они говорят, меня пугает. That which they say frightens me. Or, то, что они это сказали, меня удивляет. The fact that they said this surprises me. Okay, so again, 6 and 7, there's a very slight difference. And again, the issue really is how we would translate that into English, right? 6 is that which, 7, the fact that sounds better, right? The fact that they said this surprises me. Okay, that does it for our review of some some familiar subordinate clauses, and also some that are a little bit more sophisticated. And we'll really have to watch for these, these demonstrative plus question word conjunctions as we read literature. They're quite common, and they can be a little bit hard to pick up on sometimes because sometimes the two elements, as we saw in number 4, right, the так, они не так хорошо говорят по-русски, как мы, right, that так, как can be sort of separated, right, and you have to kind of pick up, okay, this is a tak, kak structure. That's really the basic point of interaction between these two clauses. Okay, so tomorrow again we'll look at some advanced prepositions, and then we'll start a multi-lesson unit on deverbals, right? And that's really the last big piece of the puzzle that stands between us and really reading Russian literature in the original. Those are the only remaining just major forms that we haven't learned. Okay, so until next time, до свидания, товарищи.